The world was ending in silence. That was what Arya Whitlock thought as she pressed her trembling hands against the cold wooden floor of her cottage, her breath coming in shallow gasps that fogged in the freezing pre-dawn air. Outside, the forest had gone deathly still. No birds sang. No wind stirred the ancient pines. Even the usual chorus of nocturnal creatures had fallen into an unnatural hush, as if nature itself held its breath in anticipation of violence. Through the gaps in the shuttered windows, she could see movement, shadows that circled her small home like vultures waiting for something to die. She counted them in her mind, each silhouette a death sentence, each pair of gleaming eyes in the darkness, another nail in the coffin of the life she had so carefully constructed. 50 wolves, perhaps, maybe more. All of them rogues, their scent acrid and wrong, carrying the stench of madness and bloodlust that marked those who had abandoned pack law. They had come for her. After 10 years of hiding, 10 years of pretending to be nothing more than a simple herbalist girl living alone in the woods, they had finally found her. The secret she had buried deeper than her parents' graves, the truth she had locked away behind layers of careful lies and deliberate mediocrity, had somehow been dragged into the light. And now the world she knew was collapsing around her like a house of cards in a storm. Arya's fingers dug into the rough wood beneath her palms, splinters biting into her skin as she fought to control the panic clawing at her chest. She was 22 years old, and she had survived this long by being invisible, by making herself so small and unremarkable that no one would ever think to look twice at the orphaned human girl who gathered herbs in the forest and sold tinctures at the market. She wore plain clothes, mended a dozen times over. She kept her dark hair tied back in a simple braid. She smiled politely at the villagers who came to her door seeking remedies for their ailments, never speaking more than necessary, never drawing attention to the fact that her cures worked far better than they should have, that wounds closed faster under her touch, that fevers broke with impossible speed when she laid her hands on the sick. She had learned early that survival meant obscurity. Her parents had taught her that lesson with their deaths. The memory rose unbidden, as it always did in moments of fear. She had been 12 when they died. 12 when she came home from gathering wildflowers in the meadow to find her cottage door hanging open, the interior painted in crimson horror. Her mother, Elise, sprawled across the kitchen floor with her throat torn open. Her father, Marcus, slumped against the wall with claw marks raking across his chest so deep that white bones showed through the ruined flesh. The attackers had been thorough, professional. They had left no survivors, no witnesses. They had not expected a child to return home and discover their work. Arya had stood in that doorway, flowers falling from her numb fingers, and something inside her had broken so completely that even now, a decade later, she could still feel the jagged edges of that shattered piece of her soul. She had not screamed. She had not cried. She had simply stood there, staring at the bodies of the only people who had ever loved her, and understood with terrible clarity that the world was not a place that protected little girls. The world was a place that devoured them. In the days that followed, she learned the truth her parents had hidden from her. They had not been simple herb workers, as they had claimed. They had been healers of a different kind, possessors of an ancient magic that flowed through bloodlines older than the kingdoms themselves. Her mother had been born of the Whitlock line, a family whose name had once been spoken with reverence among the wolf packs, whose healing gifts had saved countless lives and turned the tide of wars. But that reverence had curdled into fear, and fear had bred hatred, and hatred had birthed murder. The great packs had decided that healers with the power to mend any wound, to draw the dying back from the edge of the abyss, were too dangerous to exist. They could save kings, yes, but they could also save the king's enemies. They could not be controlled, could not be owned, and so they had to be eliminated. One by one, the Whitlock line had been hunted down and destroyed. Her parents had been among the last, and now Arya stood alone, the final ember of a dying fire. She had hidden after their deaths, hidden and survived. She had moved to this cottage on the very edge of the Crescent Moon Kingdom's territory, far from the capital, far from the great pack houses, far from anyone who might recognize her family name or sense the magic that slumbered in her blood. She had taught herself to suppress it, to push it down so deep that even she could barely feel it anymore. She used only the smallest fraction of her power, just enough to justify her reputation as a skilled herbalist, never enough to draw suspicion. She lived like a ghost, haunting the edges of society, speaking to no one unless necessary, forming no friendships, no attachments. She had convinced herself that if she could just remain small enough, quiet enough, invisible enough, she might survive. She might live long enough to grow old in this forgotten corner of the world, tending her garden and mixing her potions. And perhaps one day she would die peacefully in her sleep and be buried beside the lavender she had planted. It was not much of a life, but it was a life. And that was more than most of her family had been allowed. But last night, everything had changed. Last night, the knock had come at her door. She had been preparing for bed, braiding her hair by candlelight when she heard it. 3 heavy thuds against the wooden door, urgent and demanding. She had frozen, her fingers tangled in her hair, her heart suddenly pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. No one came to her cottage at night. The villagers knew better. The forest after dark belonged to wolves and worse things, and humans who valued their lives stayed inside behind locked doors and iron wards. For a long moment, she had considered simply not answering, pretending she had not heard, hoping that whoever stood outside would give up and leave. But then the knock came again, weaker this time, and beneath it she heard a sound that made her chest tighten with involuntary compassion. A groan, low and pained, the sound of someone who was badly hurt. Against every instinct screaming at her to stay inside, to protect herself, Arya had crossed to the door and opened it. The man who collapsed across her threshold was the largest person she had ever seen. He had fallen forward the moment she unlatched the door, his massive frame crashing against the floor with enough force to rattle the dishes on her shelves. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading across the worn floorboards in a dark tide that reflected the candlelight like black glass. He was dressed in torn traveling clothes that might once have been fine, but were now shredded and soaked with gore. Claw marks raked across his back, deep furrows that exposed muscle and bone. A knife wound in his side still leaked blood with each labored breath he took. His face was turned away from her, pressed against the floor, but she could see the shudder that ran through his body, the tremor of someone fighting to remain conscious against impossible odds. He was dying. Even with her limited medical knowledge, Arya could see that. He had minutes, perhaps, before shock and blood loss dragged him down into darkness. And despite everything, despite her vow to remain uninvolved, to never use her power where anyone might see, she found herself kneeling beside him, her hands already moving to assess his injuries. She should have turned him away, should have closed the door and let fate take its course. Getting involved with a wounded stranger could only bring trouble, could only draw attention to herself in ways that might prove fatal. But there was something about him, something that called to a part of her she thought she had buried with her parents. Perhaps it was the healer's instinct her mother had passed down to her, the inability to watch suffering without trying to ease it. Perhaps it was loneliness, the deep ache of a decade spent in isolation, seeing in this dying man an opportunity for human connection, however brief. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, something she did not yet have words for. A pull she felt in her chest like an invisible thread drawing her toward him. Whatever the reason, she made her choice. She dragged him further into the cottage, ignoring the way her muscles screamed in protest at his weight, and kicked the door closed behind them. Then she set to work, saving his life. The night that followed was a blur of blood and pain and magic. She cut away his ruined clothes, exposing the full extent of his injuries. They were catastrophic. The claw marks across his back had torn through layers of muscle, coming dangerously close to his spine. The knife wound in his side had punctured something internal. She could tell by the way blood bubbled from it with each breath, by the unhealthy pallor of his skin. Smaller cuts and bruises covered every inch of exposed flesh, speaking of a fight that had been brutal and prolonged. He should already be dead. The fact that he still drew breath was a testament to either incredible will or supernatural constitution. Probably both. Arya worked with the efficiency born of desperation and training. She cleaned the wounds with boiled water and herbs, her hands moving with practiced precision despite their trembling. She stitched the worst of the lacerations with thread she had prepared from spider silk and willow root, each stitch careful and exact. She packed the knife wound with poultices made from plants she grew in her garden, mixtures she had learned from her mother's journals. And when all the mundane methods were exhausted, when she had done everything a normal healer could do, and it still was not enough, she made another choice. She reached inside herself, down to the place where her magic waited like a sleeping beast, and she woke it up. The power rose through her like fire, burning along her veins, pooling in her palms. She placed her hands on his back, over the worst of the claw marks, and let it flow. Heat poured from her skin into his, knitting torn flesh, mending shattered bone, coaxing his body back toward wholeness. She felt his pain as if it were her own, felt the agony of every injury, the exhaustion dragging at his consciousness. But she pushed through it, pouring more and more of herself into the healing, until sweat ran down her face and her vision began to blur at the edges. She had not used this much power in years, had forgotten how it consumed her, how it demanded everything she had and then asked for more. But she could not stop, would not stop. Not until she felt his breathing ease, not until the color began to return to his skin, not until the worst of the danger had passed. By the time she finally pulled her hands away, the sky outside was beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn. She slumped back against the wall, utterly spent, her entire body shaking with exhaustion. The stranger lay before her, his chest rising and falling in the deep, steady rhythm of healing sleep. The wounds that had been killing him hours ago were now closed, reduced to angry red lines that would fade to scars. He would live. She had saved him, and in doing so, she had signed her own death warrant. She realized it as she sat there in the pre-dawn gloom, staring at the man she had healed. She had used too much power, been too obvious about it. Anyone with the ability to sense magic would have felt what she did tonight, would have sensed the surge of healing energy that had poured from this cottage like a beacon in the darkness. She had been so focused on saving him that she had not thought about the consequences, had not considered that there might be watchers in the forest, scouts and spies who monitored these borderlands for exactly this kind of disturbance. And now they were coming for her. She could feel it in the unnatural silence, in the way the air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation. They had found her at last, and they were gathering for the kill. Arya pushed herself to her feet, her legs unsteady beneath her. She crossed to the window and peered out through a crack in the shutters. What she saw made her blood turn to ice. The forest around her cottage was full of wolves. Not the natural wolves that sometimes hunted in these woods, but shifters in their animal forms, their eyes gleaming with intelligence and malice. They sat in a loose circle around her home, patient and still, waiting for something. She counted them again, more carefully this time. Not 50, more like 200. An army. Far more than would be needed to kill one exhausted healer. Which meant they were not here just for her. They were here for him, for the stranger sleeping on her floor. Who was he, that so many would come to finish what they had started? She turned back to look at him, really look at him for the first time since she had begun the healing. He was handsome in a harsh, brutal way, with strong features and dark hair that fell across his forehead. Even unconscious and wounded, there was something commanding about him, an aura of power that clung to him like a second skin. Scars marked his body, old ones layered beneath the fresh injuries, speaking of a life filled with violence. His hands were calloused and strong, the hands of a warrior. And now that she was not focused on keeping him alive, she could sense something else about him, something that made her breath catch in her throat. His scent. It was different from the wolves surrounding her cottage. Stronger, richer, carrying notes of pine and smoke and something wild and untamed. An alpha's scent. But not just any alpha. This was the scent of dominance, of absolute authority, of power that acknowledged no equal. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had saved the Alpha King. Aiden Calethorn, ruler of the Crescent Moon Kingdom, the most powerful shifter in all the territories. She had heard of him, of course. Everyone had. He was a legend whispered about in marketplaces and taverns, a figure of fear and respect in equal measure. They said he had taken the crown at 20 when his father was assassinated, had spent the last decade crushing rebellions and holding his fractious kingdom together through sheer force of will. They said he was ruthless, cold, that he had personally executed dozens of traitors and showed mercy to no one who threatened his rule. They said he was lonely, isolated by the weight of his crown, trusted no one and never would. And now he was lying on her floor, alive only because she had been foolish enough to save him. Outside, one of the wolves howled, a long, mournful sound that was picked up and echoed by dozens of others. The circle was tightening. They would attack soon, Arya realized. They were just waiting for full dawn, for enough light to ensure they missed nothing when they stormed her cottage. She had perhaps minutes left to decide what to do. She could try to run, to slip out the back and lose herself in the forest, but she knew she would not make it far. Not in her exhausted state, not with 200 wolves hunting her. She could try to fight, but what would she fight with? She had no weapons, no combat training. Her magic was depleted, drained to almost nothing by the healing she had performed. She could not even manage a simple protection ward in her current state. Or she could wake the king and hope that together they stood some small chance of survival. It was not much of a plan, but it was all she had. She crossed to where he lay and knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. His skin was warm beneath her touch, fever hot, his body still working to finish the healing she had started. She shook him gently, then harder when he did not respond. His eyes snapped open, and she found herself staring into the darkest eyes she had ever seen, black as midnight and filled with instant alertness. He moved fast, faster than should have been possible for someone so recently injured, his hand shooting out to grab her wrist in a grip like iron. She gasped, more from surprise than pain, and he froze, his gaze focusing on her face. They stared at each other for a long moment, the stranger and the healer, and Arya felt something shift in the air between them. It was like touching a live wire, a current of electricity that ran from his hand through her wrist and straight to her heart. His pupils dilated, his nostrils flaring as he drew in her scent, and she watched confusion flicker across his features, followed by something that might have been recognition or might have been fear. His grip on her wrist loosened but did not release, and when he spoke, his voice was rough, raw from hours of unconsciousness. "You healed me." It was not a question. He could feel it, she realized, could sense what she had done, the magic she had poured into him. "Who are you?" Arya opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, the first wolf threw itself against her door. The wooden frame shuddered under the impact, the iron latch groaning but holding. Another impact followed, then another, a steady percussion of violence that made the entire cottage shake. They were done waiting. The attack had begun. She looked back at the king, at the man she had saved, and saw the understanding dawn in his eyes. He glanced toward the door, then back at her, and when he spoke again there was something almost like respect in his voice. "How many?" She swallowed hard, forcing the words past the fear choking her throat. 200, maybe more. "Rogues, I think. They came for you." He nodded slowly, as if this was exactly what he had expected, and pushed himself to his feet with a grunt of pain. He swayed for a moment, catching himself against the wall, and she could see the effort it cost him to remain upright. He was in no condition to fight, not yet, not for hours at least, but they did not have hours. They barely had minutes. The door splintered under another assault, cracks spreading across its surface like lightning. Aiden turned to her, his face grim. "Is there another way out?" She nodded, pointing toward the back of the cottage where a small door led out into her garden. "But they will have it surrounded. We will not make it 10 steps before they catch us." He smiled then, a cold, terrible expression that held no humor. "Then I suppose we will have to make those 10 steps count." He held out his hand to her, palm up, an offering. "I do not know who you are or why you saved me, but I am in your debt. Trust me now, and I will get you out of this alive. You have my word as king." Arya stared at his outstretched hand, at the choice laid before her. She could refuse. could tell him to save himself and leave her to whatever fate the rogues had planned. But she knew she would not. Knew it with the same certainty she had known she would save him when he collapsed bleeding on her doorstep. Whatever was happening here, whatever strange pull drew her to this dangerous man, she could not fight it, did not want to fight it. So she placed her hand in his, felt his fingers close around hers with surprising gentleness, and together they turned to face the back door as the front one finally gave way with a crash of splintering wood. The rogues poured through the opening like a flood, their wolf forms filling the small cottage, teeth bared and eyes blazing with bloodlust. But Aiden was already moving, pulling Arya with him toward the back door, kicking it open and dragging her out into the cold dawn air. The garden beyond was small, bordered by forest on 3 sides, and just as she had predicted, more wolves waited among the trees. They rose as one when they saw the king emerge, a wall of fur and fangs that cut off any hope of escape. Aiden pulled her close, placing himself between her and the nearest threats, and she felt his body begin to change. Bones shifted beneath his skin, muscles rippling and expanding, his form growing larger, more terrible. He was going to shift, she realized, going to take his wolf form and fight, even though he was still wounded, still weak. He would die buying her a few extra seconds of life, and it would be meaningless because she had nowhere to run. But then something happened that changed everything. As Aiden's transformation began, as his power rose in a wave that made the air itself shimmer, Arya felt her own magic respond. It surged up from the place where she had locked it away, drawn forth by proximity to his strength, resonating with it in a way that should not have been possible. The healing power that had always been gentle and warm turned sharp and fierce, flooding her body with energy she did not know she possessed. Her hands began to glow, soft silver light spilling from her palms, and when she pressed them against Aiden's back, the light flowed into him like water into a vessel. She felt his pain vanish, felt his strength return in a rush, felt the wounds she had only partially healed close completely. His transformation completed in a heartbeat, and the wolf that stood before her was massive, black as night, and radiating power that made the rogues stumble backward in instinctive fear. Aiden's wolf turned its great head to look at her, intelligence burning in those dark eyes, and she saw wonder there, and confusion, and something else she could not name. But there was no time to think about it, no time to question what had just happened. The rogues were recovering from their shock, gathering themselves for another attack. Aiden turned back to face them, a growl building in his chest that was less sound than earthquake. And then he launched himself at the nearest wolf with savage fury. Arya watched him tear into their attackers, his jaws closing around throats, his claws ripping through flesh, and even outnumbered 100 to 1 he was winning. He fought like the king he was, like the apex predator that answered to no authority but his own, and the rogues began to fall back before him, their courage failing in the face of such terrible strength. But there were too many of them. For every one he killed, 2 more took its place. They were coordinated, working together with a precision that spoke of training and leadership, herding him away from Arya, trying to separate them. She saw the strategy forming, saw the trap closing, and knew that even an Alpha King could not fight forever. Already his movements were slowing, fatigue showing in the way he favored his left side, in the slight hesitation before each strike. He needed help, needed her. And despite having no idea what she was doing, despite the terror that made her hands shake and her vision blur, Arya reached for her magic again. She had spent 10 years learning to suppress it, to make it small and quiet and harmless. Now she needed it to be loud, needed it to be a weapon. So she stopped fighting it and let it free. The power exploded outward from her in a wave of silver light that washed over the clearing like a flood. Every wolf it touched staggered, crying out in confusion and pain as their wounds began to close, as injuries both fresh and old healed without their permission. Broken bones set themselves, torn flesh knit together. Even scars faded, erased by magic that could not distinguish between friend and foe, that simply healed everything it encountered indiscriminately. For a moment, the battle stopped entirely. rogues and king alike frozen in shock at what she had done. And in that moment of stillness, Arya understood what she had just revealed. She had shown them exactly what she was, had displayed power that confirmed every suspicion, every fear. She was a Whitlock, the last of her line, and now everyone knew it. There would be no hiding after this. No quiet life in her cottage, no safety. She had just painted a target on her back that would never wash off. But she was still alive, and so was Aiden, and that was enough. One of the rogues recovered first, a massive gray wolf that turned its attention from the king to her, recognizing the greater threat. It launched itself at her with teeth bared, and she had no defense, no way to protect herself. She threw up her hands instinctively, uselessly, knowing it would not be enough. But before the wolf could reach her, Aiden was there, crashing into it mid-leap, bearing it to the ground and closing his jaws around its neck with terminal force. He stood over the body, positioned between her and every other rogue in the clearing, and the message was unmistakable. She was his to protect. Anyone who wanted her would have to go through him first, and none of them were strong enough to do that. Not even all together. The rogues seemed to realize this at the same moment Arya did. They began to retreat, slowly at first, then faster, melting back into the forest like shadows fleeing the dawn. Within minutes, the clearing was empty, save for the bodies of the fallen, the sudden silence almost more shocking than the violence had been. Aiden's wolf stood perfectly still for a long moment, head raised, scenting the air to ensure the threat had truly passed. Then he turned to look at Arya again, and she saw the question in his eyes. She knew what he was asking, the same thing he had asked before, but with new weight now, new understanding. Who are you? What are you? And why did saving me change both our lives forever? She had no answers, or at least none that would make sense of what had just happened. So she simply met his gaze and spoke the only truth she knew. My name is Arya Whitlock, and I think we are in a great deal of trouble. The transformation back to human form happened so quickly that Arya barely registered it. One moment Aiden was a massive black wolf standing guard over her, and the next he was a man again, naked and covered in blood that was not entirely his own. He did not seem bothered by his nakedness, did not show even a flicker of self-consciousness as he surveyed the carnage scattered across her garden. His body was a map of violence, old scars layered over new ones, muscles defined by years of combat and survival. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are, all sharp edges and barely contained power. Arya forced herself to look away, heat rising in her cheeks despite the circumstances. She was not accustomed to seeing naked men, was not accustomed to seeing men at all beyond brief exchanges at the market. The intimacy of the moment felt wrong, inappropriate, though she could not have said why. Aiden seemed to notice her discomfort, because when he spoke, his voice carried a note of dark amusement. Forgive me. Shifting tends to be hard on clothing. He moved past her, back into the cottage where his torn garments lay in ruins on the floor. She heard him rummaging through her things, opening trunks and drawers with the casual entitlement of someone accustomed to taking what he needed. When he emerged a few minutes later, he had wrapped himself in one of her father's old shirts. The fabric stretched tight across his broader frame, and a pair of trousers that fit poorly but covered him. It was strange seeing her father's clothes on another man, seeing them filled out by living flesh after so many years of hanging empty in the wardrobe. It made something ache in her chest, a grief she thought she had long since mastered rising fresh and sharp. He must have seen something in her face because his expression softened slightly. I will replace them. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. They were just clothes, just fabric and thread. It should not matter. But it did, in ways she could not explain even to herself. Aiden watched her for a moment longer, then seemed to dismiss whatever he had been thinking. He turned his attention to the cottage, to the shattered front door and the blood staining her floors, and his jaw tightened. We cannot stay here. They will regroup and return with more numbers. We have perhaps an hour, maybe less. Arya looked at her home, at the only place she had felt even remotely safe for the past 10 years, and felt something inside her break. This cottage had been her sanctuary, her refuge from a world that wanted her dead. She had tended the garden with her own hands, had patched the roof through countless storms, had filled the shelves with herbs and remedies gathered from the forest. Every inch of it carried memories, both painful and precious. Her mother's handwriting in the journals stacked beside the bed, her father's tools hanging on the wall, the lavender she had planted because it had been her mother's favorite. And now she was supposed to just walk away from it all, leave it behind like it meant nothing. The unfairness of it settled over her like a physical weight, crushing and inescapable. But Aiden was right. Staying meant dying, and she had not survived this long by making foolish choices. She forced herself to move, to cross to the cottage and gather what she could carry. A cloak, worn but warm. A bag she filled with whatever supplies seemed most essential. Food that would not spoil quickly. Water skins, her mother's journals, because she could not bear to leave them behind. A knife, small and probably useless, but it made her feel slightly less helpless. She moved through the space mechanically, trying not to think about the fact that she would never see it again, that everything she was leaving behind would likely be burned or looted by the next group of rogues to pass through. When she emerged, Aiden was standing in the garden, his head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. They are moving, northeast toward the river. A large group, at least 50. He glanced at her, his dark eyes unreadable. Someone is organizing them. This was not a random attack. Someone sent them here specifically to kill me, and anyone who helped me. The implication hung between them, heavy and ominous. Arya clutched her bag tighter, her mind racing. Who would have the resources to command 200 rogues? Aiden's expression turned grim. Only someone with significant power and influence. Someone who wants my throne badly enough to violate every law we have about rogue management. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was cold with controlled fury. I have my suspicions, but suspicions are not proof. And without proof, I cannot move against them openly. Not without risking civil war. He started walking, not toward the road that led to the village, but deeper into the forest, and Arya hurried to follow him. Where are we going? She asked, struggling to keep pace with his longer strides. North, he said without slowing. To the capital. It is the only place I can guarantee your safety, and I need to deal with whoever orchestrated this before they make another attempt. The capital. The heart of the Crescent Moon Kingdom, where the great pack houses gathered and political games were played with lives as stakes. Arya had never been there, had never wanted to go. Cities were dangerous for people like her, places where she could not hide, where her magic would be noticed and questioned. But she supposed that particular concern no longer mattered. She had already revealed herself to 200 witnesses. By now, word of what she had done would be spreading through the rogue networks like wildfire. Every pack would know that a Whitlock healer had surfaced. Every enemy of the crown would know that she had saved the king. She would be hunted wherever she went. The capital, at least, had walls and guards, and the protection of the royal court. It was not much, but it was more than she had here in the forest. They walked in silence for a while, moving quickly through the trees. Aiden seemed to know the forest well, choosing paths that avoided open ground and kept them under cover. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being hunted, his senses attuned to every sound and scent. Arya tried to match his wariness but found her attention drawn to him instead, to the way he carried himself despite his recent injuries, to the authority that clung to him like a second skin. She had heard stories about the Alpha King, but none of them had prepared her for the reality of him. He was harder than she had expected, colder, but there was also something beneath that icy exterior, a complexity she could sense but not quite define. He had protected her during the attack, had placed himself between her and death without hesitation. That had to mean something, did not it? As if sensing her thoughts, Aiden spoke without looking back at her. You saved my life last night. Why? The question caught her off guard. She stumbled slightly, catching herself against a tree. You were dying on my doorstep. What else was I supposed to do? He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression intense. Most people would have let me die, or turned me over to my enemies in exchange for their own safety. You had no reason to help me. No reason to risk revealing yourself. Yet you used magic that must have cost you dearly to pull me back from death. I want to know why." Arya met his gaze, trying to find words for something she barely understood herself. "I am a healer. It is what my family has always been. When I see suffering, I cannot simply turn away. It goes against everything I am." She paused, then added quietly, "And you reminded me of something I had almost forgotten, that there are things worth risking yourself for, that hiding is not the same as living." Aiden studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You said your name was Whitlock. I thought that line had been wiped out." There was no accusation in his tone, just statement of fact, but it still made her flinch. "Almost wiped out. My parents were among the last. They died when I was 12. She forced the words out evenly, refusing to let him see how much it still hurt. "I have been hiding ever since." He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "The Purge. 20 years ago, when the Council decided that healers with your kind of power were too dangerous to exist." There was something in his voice, an edge of old anger. "My father opposed it, argued that destroying the Whitlock line was both morally wrong and strategically foolish. He was overruled by the other alphas, who feared that healers who could mend any wound might be used against them by their enemies." Aiden's jaw tightened. "After I took the throne, I tried to reverse the decree, to offer amnesty to any surviving Whitlocks. But by then, it was too late. As far as anyone knew, they were all dead." Arya absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with everything she had believed about the crown. "Your father tried to save my family?" Aiden's expression was bleak. "He tried. He failed. And then he died under mysterious circumstances that I have never been able to prove were murder, though I have my suspicions." He started walking again, his movements sharper now, agitated. "The same forces that wanted the Whitlocks destroyed wanted my father dead. They saw him as weak because he valued mercy over expedience, because he believed the crown should protect all its people, not just the strongest. When I inherited his throne, I swore I would be different, harder, strong enough that no one would dare move against me the way they moved against him." There was pain beneath those words, old wounds that had never properly healed. Arya found herself wanting to comfort him, to place her hand on his shoulder, and let her magic ease some of that burden. But she held back, uncertain if the gesture would be welcome, uncertain of her own motives. They barely knew each other. She had no right to offer him comfort, no matter how strong the impulse. Instead, she asked the question that had been nagging at her since the attack. "Who do you think sent the rogues?" Aiden was quiet for so long that she thought he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "My former beta, Magnus Draven. He was my father's most trusted advisor, and when I took the throne, he expected to maintain that position. But I discovered evidence that he had been embezzling from the crown, using his position to enrich himself while the border pack starved. When I confronted him, he fled before I could arrest him. That was 5 years ago. Since then, he has been building his own power base in exile, gathering rogues and disaffected pack members who share his belief that I am unfit to rule." The picture was becoming clearer now, the pieces falling into place. "And when you were wounded last night?" Aiden's expression turned dark. "I was returning from a diplomatic mission to the Western Territories when my convoy was ambushed. Professional work, well planned. They killed my guards within minutes, and would have killed me too if I had not managed to escape into the forest. I ran for hours, bleeding, until I could not run anymore. Your cottage was the first shelter I found." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "I thought I was going to die on your doorstep. Instead, I woke up healed and discovered that the last member of a bloodline I thought extinct had just saved my life at tremendous cost to herself. The universe has a strange sense of humor." They walked on, the forest gradually thinning as they moved north. The sun was fully up now, filtering through the canopy in shafts of golden light that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. Birds sang in the branches above, oblivious to the drama unfolding below. It all felt surreal to Arya, like she was moving through a dream. Just yesterday, her biggest concern had been whether she had enough willow bark to make it through the winter. Now she was fleeing through the forest with the Alpha King, her identity exposed, her life irrevocably changed. She should be terrified. Part of her was terrified, but another part felt almost relieved, as if some unbearable tension had finally snapped. She no longer had to hide, no longer had to pretend to be less than she was. It was liberating and horrifying in equal measure. A sound made Aiden freeze, his hand shooting out to stop her. He tilted his head, listening, and Arya held her breath, straining to hear what had alarmed him. At first, there was nothing, just the normal sounds of the forest. Then she caught it, faint but unmistakable. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving through the undergrowth with deliberate care. They were being followed. Aiden's hand went to his belt, where a knife she had not noticed before hung in a worn sheath. "How many?" she whispered. His eyes were distant, focused inward in the way that shifters got when they extended their senses. "3, moving to flank us from the east. They are trying to get ahead, cut us off." His gaze snapped to her. "Can you run?" She nodded, though her legs already ached from the walking they had done. "Good. When I say go, you run north and do not stop for anything. I will handle our followers." Panic fluttered in her chest. "You cannot fight 3 wolves alone. Not this soon after your injuries." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You healed me, remember? I am stronger now than I have been in years." He squeezed her shoulder, the gesture surprisingly gentle. "Trust me, and run." Before she could argue, he moved, vanishing into the trees with inhuman speed. She stood frozen for a heartbeat, torn between the instinct to flee and the impulse to stay and help. But what help could she offer? Her magic was still depleted, barely a flicker compared to the inferno she had unleashed during the attack. She would only be a liability in a fight. So she did as he commanded and ran. The forest blurred around her as she crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at her face and arms. Behind her, she heard sounds of combat, snarls, and the meaty impact of bodies colliding. Aiden's roar echoed through the trees, more felt than heard, a sound of pure dominance that made every wolf within a mile radius instinctively cringe. She pushed herself harder, ignoring the burning in her lungs, the stitch forming in her side. "Just keep running. Do not look back. Do not stop." "North," he said, "north." She tried to orient herself by the sun, but the canopy was too thick, the light too diffused. She might be running in circles for all she knew. Panic threatened to overwhelm her careful control, but she forced it down. Panic got people killed. She needed to think. Needed to. A figure stepped out from behind a tree directly in her path. Arya tried to stop, to change direction, but her momentum was too great. She slammed into the stranger with enough force to send them both sprawling. She hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs, and for a moment she could only lie there gasping. When her vision cleared, she found herself staring up at a woman. She was tall and lean, with silver hair despite appearing no older than 30, and eyes that shifted color as Arya watched, gray bleeding to gold and back again. A shifter, but not one of the rogues who had attacked her cottage. This woman wore fine traveling clothes, leather and wool of obvious quality, and carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. The woman looked down at her with an expression of mild curiosity. "Well, this is unexpected." She offered a hand to help Arya up, but Arya scrambled backward instead, her fingers digging into the forest floor. The woman sighed. "Relax, little healer. If I wanted you dead, you would be dead already." She tilted her head, studying Arya with unnerving intensity. "Whitlock blood. I can smell it on you. And something else. Something that should not be possible." Her eyes narrowed. "You have touched the king. Recently. Intimately." The way she said it made it sound obscene, and Arya felt heat rush to her face. "I healed him. That is all." The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That is all," she says, as if healing the most powerful alpha in the kingdom with forbidden magic is a small thing. She moved closer, and Arya scrambled to her feet, putting a tree between them. "Who are you?" The woman smiled, showing teeth that were slightly too sharp. "My name is Lyra Silvermane, and I am here to offer you a choice, Arya Whitlock. How did she know her name? Arya had not told her. Unless you were at the cottage during the attack. Lyra inclined her head. I was, observing from a distance. I wanted to see what you would do when confronted with an impossible situation. Whether you would run or fight. Whether the rumors about your power were true. She circled the tree, forcing Arya to keep moving to maintain distance between them. I must say, you exceeded my expectations. That display of healing magic was quite impressive. Wasteful and indiscriminate, but impressive. Arya's mind raced, trying to make sense of this. You said you had a choice to offer me. What choice? Lyra stopped circling and leaned against a tree, the picture of casual ease. Come with me. I represent a group that has been watching the Whitlock line for generations, preserving what knowledge we could when the Purge destroyed your family. We have resources, protection, training that could help you master your gifts. In exchange, you would use those gifts to serve our cause. And what cause would that be? Arya demanded, not bothering to hide her suspicion. Lyra's smile widened. Overthrowing the corrupt alpha families who have mismanaged this kingdom for far too long. Building a new order where power is earned through merit rather than inherited through bloodlines. Where people like you are valued rather than hunted. It sounded noble. Too noble. Arya had learned long ago that people who claimed to want revolution usually just wanted to replace one set of tyrants with another. And if I refuse? Lyra shrugged. Then you die. Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but soon. The king cannot protect you, Arya. He is barely managing to protect himself. Every pack in the kingdom will be hunting you now, either to claim your power for themselves or to eliminate the threat you represent. Without training, without allies, you will be overwhelmed and killed within a month, probably less. She pushed off the tree and took a step closer. Or you could come with me. Learn to defend yourself. Learn to use your magic as the weapon it was always meant to be. And perhaps, along the way, help us build something better than this broken system. Arya wanted to refuse. Wanted to tell this silver-haired stranger to go to hell and take her offers with her. But there was truth in what Lyra said. She was a target now, exposed and vulnerable. Aiden had promised to protect her. But could he really? He was fighting for his throne, dealing with traitors and assassins. She would be a distraction at best, a liability at worst. Maybe Lyra was right. Maybe the smart choice was to accept help from wherever it was offered, even if that help came with strings attached. But before she could respond, Aiden's voice cut through the trees. Step away from her, Lyra. Now. He emerged from the shadows like a vengeful spirit, blood spattering his borrowed clothes, his eyes blazing with fury. Lyra did not seem surprised to see him. If anything, she looked pleased. Aiden. Still clinging to life, I see. You are harder to kill than your father was. Aiden moved to place himself between Lyra and Arya, his body tense as a drawn bow. I could say the same about you. I thought I made it clear that you were not welcome in my kingdom when I exiled your pack. Lyra laughed. Your kingdom? As if you have ever truly controlled it. You sit on a throne built on lies and maintained through fear, and you wonder why your people plot against you. Her gaze shifted to Arya. Ask him, little healer. Ask him what happened to the other Whitlocks, who really gave the order for the purge. Arya looked between them, confusion and dread warring in her chest. What is she talking about? Aiden's jaw tightened, but he did not look away from Lyra. She is trying to manipulate you, to turn you against me before we have had a chance to build trust. But Lyra was not finished. His father opposed the purge. Yes, but do you know who voted in favor? Who advocated most strongly for the complete eradication of your family? Her smile was vicious. His mother, Luna Calethorn, the woman who raised him, who taught him everything he knows about ruling. She believed healers were an existential threat to pack hierarchy and had to be destroyed. And when your parents tried to flee, when they thought they had escaped, it was Calethorn gold that paid the assassins who hunted them down. She turned her gaze back to Aiden. Tell her I am lying. Go ahead. Look her in the eye and tell her your family's hands are clean. The silence that followed was deafening. Arya stared at Aiden, willing him to deny it, to tell her that Lyra was twisting the truth. But he said nothing. His expression closed off, and that silence was more damning than any confession. The realization hit her like a physical blow. His family had killed her parents, the crown she had been taught to fear. The throne that represented everything that had destroyed her childhood was connected directly to the man she had saved, the man she had risked everything to protect. A sound escaped her throat, something between a laugh and a sob. Of course it would be like this. The universe really did have a terrible sense of humor. "Arya," Aiden said, his voice rough. "Let me explain." But she could not hear it, could not stand there and listen to him justify the unjustifiable. She took a step back, then another, shaking her head. "Stay away from me." The words came out broken, barely a whisper. Lyra was suddenly beside her, her hand gentle on Arya's shoulder. "Come with me. Let me help you." And because Arya could see no other choice, because the man she had saved had just been revealed as connected to her family's murder, because she was tired and scared and had nowhere else to go, she let Lyra lead her away into the forest, leaving Aiden standing alone among the trees, his hand outstretched and his eyes full of something that might have been regret. Lyra's camp was hidden deep in a ravine that Arya never would have found on her own, concealed by clever use of natural rock formations, and what she suspected was old magic woven into the very landscape. As they descended the narrow path carved into the cliff face, Arya counted at least 24 wolves scattered throughout the encampment, some in human form and some not, all of them watching her with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. They were a mixed group, she noticed. Different pack markings, different regional accents when they spoke to each other in low voices. Rogues, technically, though they seemed far more organized than the savage animals who had attacked her cottage. These wolves had discipline, structure, a shared purpose that went beyond simple survival. It made them more dangerous, not less. Lyra led her to a tent near the center of the camp, larger than the others and furnished with surprising comfort. Furs covered the ground, thick enough to sleep on. A small brazier provided warmth against the autumn chill. There was even a low table with a pitcher of water and clean cups, luxuries Arya had not expected to find in a rogue encampment. Lyra gestured for her to sit, then poured water for both of them with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to playing hostess. "You must have questions," she said, settling across from Arya with her cup cradled between her hands. "Ask them. I promised you answers, and I keep my promises." Arya wrapped her hands around her own cup, grateful for the warmth even though she was not particularly thirsty. Her mind was churning with too many thoughts, too many emotions she did not know how to process. The revelation about Aiden's mother, about the Crown's involvement in her parents' deaths, sat in her stomach like a stone. She wanted to scream, to rage, to break something. But she had learned long ago that emotion without control accomplished nothing. So she forced herself to focus on the practical questions first, the ones that might actually keep her alive. "You said you represent a group. What group? Who are you really?" Lyra smiled, as if she had been hoping for exactly that question. "We call ourselves the Covenant. We are wolves who believe that the current pack system is fundamentally broken, that it concentrates too much power in the hands of too few families, and that this concentration inevitably leads to corruption and abuse. We seek to replace it with something better. A meritocracy where strength and capability matter more than bloodline, where leaders are chosen for their worth rather than their parentage." She took a sip of water, her eyes never leaving Arya's face. "We have been operating in secret for nearly 15 years, recruiting carefully, building our resources. We have members in every major pack in the kingdom, wolves who share our vision and are willing to work toward it, even if it means betraying their alphas." It sounded like treason. It probably was treason. But Arya found she could not muster much outrage about it. The system Lyra described was the same system that had killed her family, that had forced her to hide for 10 years, that would hunt her down and destroy her if given the chance. Why should she feel loyalty to that? "And what do you want from me?" she asked. "You said I could help your cause." "How?" Lyra leaned forward, intensity burning in her shifting eyes. "Your healing magic is a weapon, Arya. A powerful one. An army with a Whitlock healer is nearly unstoppable. Wounds that would normally take weeks to recover from could be healed in hours. Soldiers who should be dead could be returned to fighting condition. You could change the course of battles, tip the balance of power in ways that no amount of conventional strength could match. The words made Arya's skin crawl. "You want to use me as a tool for war." Lyra did not deny it. "I want to use you to win a war that is already happening, whether you acknowledge it or not. The old families are tearing this kingdom apart, fighting over scraps of power while the common wolves starve. Magnus Draven is just one symptom of a much larger disease. There will be more like him, more ambitious betas and frustrated alphas who think they can do better than the current king. The kingdom is fracturing, Arya. The only question is who will be left standing when the pieces finish falling." She reached across the table, not quite touching Arya's hand, but close enough that the gesture felt intimate. "Help us. Train with us. Learn to use your gifts properly, and then help us build something worth believing in." Arya pulled her hand back, wrapping both arms around herself. "And if I refuse? If I decide I want no part of your revolution?" Lyra's expression hardened. "Then you would be a fool, but I would not stop you from leaving. We are not kidnappers, Arya. We do not force people to join our cause. However, I would strongly suggest that before you make any decisions, you stay with us for a few days. See what we are building here. Talk to our people. Learn the truth about the crown you seemed so ready to trust." Her smile returned, sharp and knowing. "And give yourself time to decide whether you really want to tie your fate to a king whose family murdered yours." The reminder stabbed through Arya like a knife, bringing back the pain she had been trying to push down. Aiden's face flashed through her mind, the look in his eyes when Lyra had revealed his mother's role in the purge. He had not denied it, had not even tried to defend himself, which meant it was true. His family had paid for her parents' deaths, had probably celebrated when the last Whitlocks were finally eliminated. And she had saved him, had poured her magic into him, used up reserves of power she might never fully recover, risked exposing herself, all to preserve the life of a man whose bloodline was stained with her family's murder. The irony was almost too bitter to bear, but even as the anger rose in her chest, another voice whispered doubt. Aiden had been a child when the purge happened. He could not have been more than 10 years old when her parents died. What role could he possibly have played in decisions made by his mother and the Council of Alphas? Was it fair to blame him for crimes committed before he even took the throne? She did not know what to think, what to feel. Everything was too tangled, too complicated. She needed time to sort through it all, to figure out where the truth ended and the manipulation began. Because she was not naive enough to believe that Lyra was telling her the whole truth. The woman was trying to recruit her, which meant she was showing Arya exactly what she wanted Arya to see, framing everything in the light most favorable to her cause. But that did not mean she was wrong. Liars could tell true things when it suited them. "I will stay," Arya said finally, her voice flat with exhaustion, "for a few days, to learn more about what you are offering. But I am not promising anything beyond that." Lyra's smile was triumphant, though she tried to hide it. "That is all I ask. You will have your own tent, privacy when you need it, and I will assign someone to begin teaching you how to properly control your magic. The raw power you displayed this morning was impressive, but it was also wildly inefficient. You burned through your reserves far faster than necessary and healed indiscriminately, wasting energy on wolves who were trying to kill you. With training, you could do twice as much with half the effort." She stood, gesturing for Arya to follow. "Come, let me show you around." The camp was larger than Arya had initially realized, spreading out through the ravine in multiple levels connected by rope bridges and carved steps. Lyra walked her through it with obvious pride, pointing out the training grounds where wolves sparred in both human and animal forms, the armory where weapons were forged and maintained, the communal cooking area where a dozen wolves worked together to prepare the evening meal. Everyone they passed stopped to stare at Arya, some with curiosity, some with suspicion, a few with outright hostility. Lyra noticed but did not comment, simply kept walking and talking as if she did not see the way her people tracked Arya's every movement. They stopped at a tent near the edge of the camp, smaller than Lyra's, but still more comfortable than Arya's cottage had been. "This will be yours," Lyra said, pulling back the flap to reveal a sleeping pallet, a trunk for belongings, and a small brazier. Not luxurious, but adequate. There is a stream just beyond those trees if you want to wash, and meals are served communally at dawn, midday, and dusk. You are free to move about the camp as you wish, though I would suggest staying within the ravine for now. We have patrols in the surrounding forest, and they might not recognize you as one of ours. One of ours. As if Arya belonged here already. As if her mere presence in the camp meant she had chosen a side. She swallowed the instinctive protest, reminding herself that she had agreed to stay, to learn. That meant playing along, at least for now. "Thank you," she said, keeping her voice neutral. Lyra studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Someone will come to fetch you for the evening meal. Until then, rest. You have had a difficult day, and tomorrow will likely be harder." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Arya? Do not try to leave. Not yet. Give us a chance to prove ourselves before you run back to the king. You might be surprised by what you discover." Then she was gone, leaving Arya alone in the tent with her churning thoughts and the growing certainty that she had just made a terrible mistake. But what choice did she have? She could not go back to her cottage, could not return to Aiden. Not now, not knowing what she knew. And she had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. The Covenant might be using her, might have their own agenda that had nothing to do with her well-being, but at least they were offering her something. Training, protection, a chance to become more than a victim hiding in the woods. Maybe that was worth the risk. Or maybe she was just desperate enough to convince herself of anything that allowed her to keep moving forward, instead of collapsing under the weight of everything that had happened. She sat down on the pallet, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion that had been building since dawn. Her body ached from the running and the magic use, bruises forming where she had fallen, her hands raw from clutching tree bark and rough stone. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional turmoil churning in her chest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her parents' bodies, saw Aiden's face when Lyra revealed the truth, saw the cottage burning, because surely by now Magnus's rogues had returned and destroyed what little she had left of her old life. Everything she had built, everything she had clung to for 10 years, was gone. She was adrift, unmoored, with no anchor and no safe harbor. And the only people offering her shelter were revolutionaries who wanted to use her as a weapon in a war she did not fully understand. A sound outside the tent made her look up. A young woman stood in the entrance, maybe 19 or 20, with copper hair pulled back in a warrior's braid and scars crossing her forearms. She looked uncomfortable, her posture stiff and formal. "The healer Arya?" Arya nodded, too tired to correct the title. "Lyra sent me to begin your training. If you are willing." The woman shifted her weight, clearly uncertain how to proceed. "I am Kira. I have some experience with teaching magic users, though I will admit I have never worked with a healer before. Most of what I know is combat-focused." Arya considered refusing, pleading exhaustion and grief as an excuse to be left alone. But something in Kira's awkward sincerity made her reconsider. The woman did not look like she wanted to be here any more than Arya did, which paradoxically made her more trustworthy than Lyra's smooth confidence. "All right," Arya said, pushing herself to her feet with effort. "What did you have in mind?" Kira's relief was palpable. "Just some basic exercises tonight. You are clearly exhausted, so nothing strenuous. I thought we could start with meditation techniques, help you learn to sense your magic more clearly, and control when you release it. Lyra said you used a massive amount of power this morning but could not direct it with any precision. We will work on fixing that." They moved to a quiet spot near the stream, away from the main camp. Kira had Arya sit cross-legged on a flat rock, then settled across from her in a mirror position. "Close your eyes," she instructed, her voice surprisingly gentle, "and try to feel where your magic lives inside you. Do not reach for it. Do not try to use it. Just acknowledge its presence, like greeting an old friend." Arya did as she was told, sinking into herself. At first there was nothing, just the usual awareness of her body, her breath, her heartbeat. But as she went deeper, pushing past the surface level of consciousness, she began to sense it. A warmth in her chest, pulsing in rhythm with her heart. Her magic. It felt depleted, diminished from this morning's expenditure, but still present. Still alive. Good, Kira murmured, as if she could sense what Arya was experiencing. Now that you have found it, I want you to visualize it as something concrete. Some people see their magic as a pool of water, others as a flame or a growing plant. It does not matter what image you choose, as long as it feels right to you. The visualization will help you control the flow when you need to use it. Arya thought about it, searching for the right metaphor. Water felt wrong, too fluid and shapeless. Fire was too aggressive, too consuming. But as she sat there, feeling the warmth in her chest, an image began to form. A tree, ancient and massive, with roots that went deep into the earth and branches that reached toward the sky. Her magic was the sap flowing through that tree, life-giving and essential, present in every leaf and twig. When she healed, she was sharing that sap, letting it flow from her into others, nourishing and repairing. A tree, she said aloud, opening her eyes. My magic feels like a tree. Kira smiled, the first genuine expression Arya had seen from her. That is a good image, strong and grounded. Hold on to that. Every time you use your magic from now on, visualize the tree and choose deliberately which branches to draw from, how much sap to release. It will help you avoid the kind of uncontrolled burst you did this morning. She shifted, pulling a knife from her belt. Before Arya could react, Kira drew the blade across her own palm, opening a shallow cut that immediately began to bleed. Now, heal this, but use only as much power as the injury requires. No more, no less. Arya stared at the bleeding hand, at the casual way Kira had injured herself for a lesson, and felt something shift in her understanding. These people were serious. They were not playing at revolution, not just talking about change. They were willing to bleed for it, to suffer for it. That had to mean something. She reached out, placing her fingers gently over Kira's wound, and visualized her tree. She chose a small branch, thin and delicate, and let just a trickle of sap flow down it. The warmth moved from her chest to her hand, and she felt the magic begin to work. Kira's skin knitted together slowly, methodically, the wound closing over the course of several seconds rather than the instant healing she had managed with Aiden. When it was done, Kira's palm bore only a faint pink line, and Arya felt barely any drain on her reserves. Better, Kira said, examining her hand with approval. Much better. You see the difference? Controlled use is always more efficient than raw power. If you can master this kind of precision, you will be able to heal dozens of people without exhausting yourself. She wiped the blood from her palm and sheathed her knife. We will practice more tomorrow. For now, you should rest. Meditation and precision work can be as tiring as physical combat when you are not used to it. She stood, then hesitated, as if debating whether to say something. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet. Lyra told us who you are, what you are. The last Whitlock. Her eyes met Arya's, and there was something like understanding in them. My family was purged too. Not healers, but seers. My grandmother could read futures in the stars, predict battles and betrayals. The Alphas decided that was too dangerous, that knowing the future gave too much power. So they killed everyone in my bloodline who showed the gift. Arya's breath caught. You? Kira shook her head. I have no visions, no prophecies. The gift skipped me, probably because my father was human. But I grew up hearing the stories, knowing what the crown took from us. That is why I am here, why I fight with the Covenant. She crouched down so she was at eye level with Arya. I am not going to pretend that what we are doing is simple or clean. Revolution never is. People will die, probably a lot of people, before this is over. But the alternative is continuing to live under a system that murders children for being born with the wrong gifts. And I cannot accept that. I will not. She reached out and squeezed Arya's shoulder, the gesture brief but sincere. You do not have to decide tonight whether you are with us. But I hope you will think about what I said. about what we have both lost to the crown's fear. Then she was gone, leaving Arya alone by the stream with her thoughts and the distant sound of the camp settling in for the night. She sat there for a long time, watching the water flow over smooth stones, letting the cold air clear her head. Everything Kira had said made sense. The system was broken. It had killed her parents, killed Kira's family, probably killed countless others whose stories she would never hear. The crown maintained power through violence and fear, eliminating anyone who might pose a threat, even if that threat was just the possibility of being used against them. How many gifted bloodlines had been wiped out over the centuries? How much knowledge and power had been lost because the Alphas were too paranoid to allow anything they could not control? But overthrowing the system meant war, meant death on a scale that made Arya's stomach turn. The Covenant might have noble goals, but they would achieve them through blood and fire, through battles that would kill innocents along with the guilty. Was that really better than the current system? Or was it just trading one form of violence for another? She did not know, could not know, not without seeing more, learning more, understanding what the Covenant truly intended, and whether their vision of a better world was achievable or just another beautiful lie. And then there was Aiden. The thought of him made her chest ache in ways she did not want to examine. He had saved her during the attack, had protected her without hesitation even though he barely knew her. He had promised to keep her safe, to take her to the capital where she would be under the crown's protection. And yes, his mother had been involved in the purge. Yes, his family's gold had paid for her parents' deaths. But Aiden himself had opposed the decree, had tried to offer amnesty to any surviving Whitlocks. Did that absolve him of his family's crimes? No. But did it mean he was irredeemable, beyond trust? She was not sure of that either. The moon rose over the ravine, pale and cold, illuminating the camp in silver light. Arya finally stood, her muscles protesting the movement, and made her way back to her tent. She lay down on the pallet without bothering to undress, pulling a fur over herself against the chill. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of dreams. She dreamed of her parents, alive and whole, working in the garden of her childhood home. She dreamed of fire consuming the cottage, of wolves with burning eyes circling closer and closer, and she dreamed of Aiden, standing alone in a throne room full of shadows, reaching out to her with blood on his hands while she backed away, unable to bridge the distance between them no matter how desperately she wanted to. She woke to someone shaking her shoulder, harsh and insistent. Her eyes snapped open to find Lyra standing over her, her expression tight with urgency. "Get up. We have a situation." Arya pushed herself upright, still groggy from too little sleep. "What kind of situation?" Lyra pulled back the tent flap, gesturing for Arya to follow. "The kind where the Alpha King shows up at our border with 50 royal guards and demands we return his healer. He is threatening to burn the ravine if we do not comply within the hour." She looked back at Arya, her eyes hard. "So you are going to have to make a choice, Arya Whitlock. Right now. Do you stay with us, or do you go back to him? Because whatever you decide, there is no changing your mind after this. Choose." Arya's heart hammered against her ribs as she followed Lyra through the pre-dawn darkness of the camp. Wolves were moving everywhere, strapping on weapons and armor with the grim efficiency of people preparing for battle. The air thrummed with tension, with the electric anticipation of violence about to break. She could smell it on the wind, sharp and metallic, mixing with the scent of fear and adrenaline that poured off every shifter she passed. They were outnumbered, she realized. Lyra had perhaps 30 wolves in this camp, maybe 40 if she counted the scouts who must be out patrolling. Against 50 royal guards, elite warriors handpicked by the king himself, those odds were not favorable. This would be a slaughter unless someone backed down. And from the set of Lyra's shoulders, the cold fury in her eyes, she had no intention of backing down. They climbed to the highest point of the ravine, a natural overlook that gave a clear view of the forest beyond. Dawn was just beginning to break, painting the sky in shades of gray and gold, and in that pale light, Arya could see them. The royal guard, arranged in perfect formation at the tree line, their silver armor gleaming, their weapons drawn and ready. They looked like an army from legend, disciplined and deadly, the kind of force that had conquered kingdoms and crushed rebellions. And at their center, unmistakable even at this distance, stood Aiden. He was no longer wearing her father's borrowed clothes, but was instead dressed in full regalia, black leather and silver mail, a sword at his hip that looked like it had tasted blood 1,000 times. His posture radiated authority, command, the absolute certainty of a king who expected to be obeyed. But even from here, Arya could see the tension in his frame, the way his hand rested on his sword hilt, the barely controlled fury in every line of his body. He had come for her, and he was prepared to go through anyone who stood in his way. Lyra pulled out a horn, ancient and carved from bone, and raised it to her lips. The sound that emerged was deep and resonant, carrying across the ravine to the forest beyond. A challenge, an answer to Aiden's ultimatum. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Aiden stepped forward, alone, leaving his guards behind. He walked toward the ravine with the steady, unhurried pace of someone who knew no arrow would find him, no blade would dare strike. When he was close enough that his voice would carry, he stopped and looked up at the overlook, his dark eyes finding Arya unerringly despite the distance and the growing light. "Arya Whitlock," he called, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "I have come to honor my promise, to bring you to safety as I swore I would. Return with me willingly, and no blood needs to be shed here today." Lyra laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Your promises mean nothing, Calethorn. You promised your father's killers would be brought to justice. Still waiting on that. You promised to root out corruption in your court. Still waiting on that too. Why should she believe anything you say?" Aiden's gaze never left Arya. "Because unlike you, Silvermane, I do not hide behind pretty words and false revolution. I tell the truth, even when it damns me. Yes, my mother was involved in the purge. Yes, my family's gold paid for atrocities I cannot undo. But I am not my mother, and I am not asking Arya to forget what was done to her family. I am asking her to give me a chance to make it right, to help me build something better than what came before." The words hit Arya like physical blows, each one resonating with something deep inside her. She wanted to believe him, wanted desperately to think that he meant what he said, that his promise of protection and justice was more than empty rhetoric. But how could she trust him? His family had destroyed hers. His mother had orchestrated the murder of everyone she loved. The crown he wore was built on the bones of her people. How could she possibly look past that? Lyra seemed to sense her hesitation because she moved closer, her voice pitched low so only Arya could hear. "Do not let him manipulate you with guilt and sentiment. He is a king. Manipulation is what they do. He does not care about you, Arya. He cares about controlling you, about making sure your power serves his throne rather than opposing it. The moment you are no longer useful, he will discard you just like his mother discarded your family." Was that true? Arya searched Aiden's face, trying to read the truth in his expression. But he was too far away, too carefully composed. She could not tell what he was thinking, what he truly wanted from her. All she had were his words and his actions, and those painted a contradictory picture. He had protected her during the attack, yes, had placed himself between her and death without hesitation. But he had also withheld the truth about his mother, had let her go on believing the crown was innocent of her family's murder when he must have known otherwise. That omission felt like betrayal, even if it was technically not a lie. She took a breath, then another, trying to calm the chaos of her thoughts. She needed to make a decision. Stay with the Covenant and commit to their revolution, or return to Aiden and trust that he would keep his word. Both choices felt impossible. Both felt like stepping off a cliff with no idea what waited at the bottom. Finally, she stepped forward to the edge of the overlook, close enough that Aiden could see her clearly. "You said you wanted to make things right," she called down to him, her voice steadier than she felt. "How? How do you make right the systematic murder of an entire bloodline? How do you repay that debt?" Aiden's expression tightened, pain flickering across his features before he locked it down. "I cannot. There is no repayment for what was done, no way to bring back the dead or undo the suffering. All I can offer is my word that it will not happen again. That as long as I hold the throne, no one will be persecuted for their gifts, no bloodline will be purged out of fear, and I can offer you a place at my side, not as a subject or a tool, but as an equal. Help me remake this kingdom into something worthy of the sacrifices made to build it. It was a powerful offer, the kind of thing that would have swayed her if she had not spent the last day learning about the Covenant's vision, about the possibility of something truly new, rather than just a reformed version of the old system. Lyra was right about one thing at least. Aiden was still fundamentally committed to the crown, to maintaining the hierarchy that put alphas at the top and everyone else beneath them. He wanted to be a benevolent king, a just ruler, but he still wanted to be king. The Covenant wanted to burn the whole system down and build something different from the ashes. Which path was better? She genuinely did not know, but she knew she could not make this decision under pressure. With 50 guards ready to attack and Lyra's wolves preparing to defend, she needed time, space, a chance to think without everyone's eyes on her. "I need to speak with you," she said to Aiden. "Alone. Just the two of us. No guards, no armies. Give me that much, and I will hear what you have to say." Aiden nodded immediately. "Agreed. Where?" Arya looked at Lyra, who was already shaking her head. "Absolutely not. You go down there alone, and he will take you by force. I am not letting you walk into that trap." But Arya had already made up her mind. "I am not asking your permission, Lyra. I am telling you what I am going to do. You said I had a choice. This is me choosing." She turned back to Aiden. "There is a clearing half a mile north of here, near a fallen oak. Meet me there in 1 hour. Come alone, or do not come at all." She did not wait for his response, simply turned and walked back down the path toward camp, ignoring Lyra's curses and protests behind her. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs, but she forced herself to keep moving, to project confidence she did not entirely feel. This was insane. She was going to meet alone with a king who had every reason to take her prisoner, trusting that he would honor the terms of an agreement made in front of witnesses who would not be there to enforce it. But she needed to do this, needed to look him in the eye without Lyra whispering poison in one ear and his guards posturing in the background, needed to make her decision based on her own judgment rather than everyone else's agendas. She returned to her tent and gathered her few belongings, checking that her mother's journals were still safely tucked in her bag. Whatever happened in that clearing, wherever she ended up after this conversation, she was not leaving those behind. They were all she had left of her family, the only tangible connection to the life that had been stolen from her. She strapped her knife to her belt, knowing it would be useless if Aiden decided to betray her, but needing the small comfort of being armed anyway. Then she sat on her pallet and waited for enough time to pass, watching the light grow stronger through the tent fabric, listening to the sounds of the camp around her. Kira appeared in the entrance eventually, her expression troubled. "Lyra sent me to talk sense into you." Arya looked up at her, managing a tired smile. "And are you going to?" Kira hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I think you are making a mistake, but it is your mistake to make. You are not our prisoner, whatever Lyra might prefer." She came in and sat down across from Arya, her scarred hands clasped between her knees. "But I want you to know something before you go. The king is not what you think he is. He is charming when he wants to be, and he can sound so reasonable, so sincere. But he has executed people for crimes far less serious than helping his enemies. He has burned villages that sheltered rebels. He is capable of great cruelty when he believes the situation demands it. Do not let his pretty words blind you to what he is." Arya absorbed this, adding it to the growing weight of information and opinion she was trying to process. "Did you know him? Before you joined the Covenant?" Kira's laugh was bitter. "I served in his guard for 2 years. I saw firsthand how he ruled, what he was willing to sacrifice for the sake of stability. That is why I left. Why I sought out Lyra and offered my services to the Covenant." She met Arya's eyes, her expression earnest. "He is not a monster. I will give him that much. But he is a king, and kings do monstrous things when they believe they have no choice. Do not forget that when he is making his promises." The words stayed with Arya as she left the camp, as she made her way north through the forest toward the fallen oak. The sun was fully up now, burning off the morning mist, turning the world bright and clear. Birds sang in the branches overhead, oblivious to the drama unfolding below. It would have been a beautiful morning under other circumstances, the kind of autumn day that made you grateful to be alive. Instead, Arya felt like she was walking to her own execution, each step carrying her closer to a moment that would define the rest of her life, however long that might be. She reached the clearing before Aiden did and used the time to prepare herself mentally. She sat on the fallen oak, its bark rough under her palms, and tried to organize her thoughts into something coherent. What did she want from this conversation? What answers was she looking for? The truth, she supposed. About his mother's role in the purge, about his own feelings regarding what had been done, about what he truly intended for her if she returned with him to the capital. And maybe, beneath all of that, she wanted to understand the strange pull she felt toward him, the connection that had formed the moment she touched his wounds and let her magic flow. Was it just the bond between healer and patient? Or was it something deeper? Something that transcended the history between their families? She sensed him before she saw him, a prickling awareness at the back of her neck that made her turn. Aiden emerged from the trees alone as promised. No armor now, just simple traveling clothes and the sword at his hip. He looked tired, she noticed. There were shadows under his eyes that had not been there before, lines of strain around his mouth. He had not slept, she realized. Had probably spent the entire night tracking her, gathering his guards, preparing for this confrontation. The thought made something twist in her chest, though she could not have said whether it was sympathy or resentment. He stopped a few paces away, maintaining distance between them, his hands visible and empty of weapons. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." His voice was quieter than it had been when he was shouting across the ravine, more vulnerable. "I was not sure you would come." Arya shrugged, trying for casual and probably failing. "I needed answers, and I do not trust Lyra to give them to me without twisting everything to serve her agenda." She paused, gathering her courage. "So here is your chance, Aiden Calethorn. Tell me the truth. All of it. No omissions, no political dancing. If you want me to trust you, you need to give me something to trust." Aiden nodded slowly, then moved to sit on a rock across from her fallen oak, putting them at eye level. "My mother, Luna Calethorn, was the driving force behind the Whitlock Purge. She convinced the Council of Alphas that healers with your family's power represented an existential threat to pack stability. Her argument was that a single Whitlock could change the outcome of any conflict, that whoever controlled the healers controlled the kingdom. Therefore, the only way to maintain balance between the packs was to ensure no one had access to that kind of power. He looked down at his hands, his jaw tight. "My father opposed her, argued that the Whitlocks had served the packs loyally for generations, that destroying them would be both morally wrong and strategically stupid. But he was outvoted. The council sided with my mother, and the purge was authorized." Arya felt something cold settle in her stomach. "And you? Where were you when this was happening?" Aiden's expression turned bleak. "I was 10 years old enough to understand what was happening but too young to do anything about it. I watched my parents argue about it for months, watched my father lose that battle and withdraw into himself. And then, 2 years later, he was dead, killed in what was officially ruled a hunting accident, but what I have always believed was assassination." He looked up at her, and the pain in his eyes was raw and unguarded. "I could not prove it, still cannot, but I know in my bones that my mother had him killed because he was too weak, too merciful, too willing to put morality above power. She wanted a stronger heir, someone who would rule with an iron fist. So she removed the obstacle and began training me to be the king she needed." The confession hung between them, heavy with implications. Arya tried to process it, to fit this new information into her understanding of the man before her. Did she succeed? Are you the king she wanted you to be? Aiden's laugh was harsh, devoid of humor. "No, I spent 10 years pretending to be exactly what she wanted while secretly working against everything she stood for. When I finally took the throne at 20, after she died from illness that I had nothing to do with no matter what the rumors say, the first thing I did was reverse every policy I could that she had put in place, including the decree authorizing the purge of gifted bloodlines. He leaned forward, intensity burning in his gaze. I cannot bring back the dead, Arya. I cannot undo what my mother did to your family, but I can make sure it never happens again. And I can offer you something she never would have allowed: a voice in how this kingdom is governed, a seat at the table where decisions are made. It was everything she might have hoped to hear, and yet doubt still gnawed at her. Why? Why offer that to me specifically? There must be dozens of gifted wolves in your kingdom, people with abilities that could be useful. Why am I different? Aiden was quiet for a long moment, seeming to struggle with how to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he was clearly trying to contain. Because from the moment I woke up in your cottage and saw what you had done, felt the magic you had poured into me to save my life, something changed. I do not fully understand it myself. It is like there is a thread connecting us, pulling me toward you no matter how hard I try to resist. Every instinct I have says that you are important, that losing you would be losing something essential. He stood abruptly, pacing like a caged animal. The wolf in me recognizes you as mate. My human side knows that is insane, that we barely know each other, that the history between our families should make any kind of relationship impossible. But I cannot deny what I feel, and I refuse to let fear or politics or the sins of the past destroy something that could be extraordinary. The words hit Arya like a thunderbolt, stunning her into silence. Mate. He had said mate. The bond she had sensed between them, the pull she could not explain, was not just healer and patient or even simple attraction. It was the fated mate bond, the rarest and most powerful connection that could exist between wolves, or between a wolf and someone with enough magic in their blood to register as wolf-adjacent, which apparently she did. The implications were staggering. If they were truly fated mates, then rejecting Aiden would cause them both anguish, would leave a hole in their souls that would never fully heal. But accepting the bond meant tying herself to him irrevocably, becoming part of the royal family, taking on all the complications and dangers that came with that position. You cannot just spring something like that on me and expect me to make a rational decision, she said, her voice shaking. Fated mates? Are you certain? Because that is not something you can take back once acknowledged. Aiden stopped pacing and looked at her, and the vulnerability in his expression nearly broke her heart. I am as certain as I can be without completing the bond. Every sense I have confirms it. But I am not asking you to accept it right now. I am just asking you to give us a chance. Come back to the capital with me. Let me show you that I am serious about change, about building something better. And if after seeing what I am trying to do you still want to walk away, I will let you go. No force, no coercion. You will have my protection either way, mate bond or not, because you saved my life, and I owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid. Arya stood from the oak, needing to move, to think. She walked to the edge of the clearing, staring out into the forest without really seeing it. Behind her, she could feel Aiden waiting, giving her space to process. The smart thing would be to refuse, to tell him that the mate bond was convenient timing at best and manipulation at worst, that she could not trust someone whose family had destroyed hers no matter what he promised. The smart thing would be to return to the Covenant, to throw her lot in with Lyra and her revolution, to help tear down the system that had killed her parents. But when she closed her eyes and reached for her magic, for the intuition that had guided her through 10 years of hiding and survival, it did not point her toward the Covenant. It pointed her toward Aiden, toward the man who had protected her in battle, who had tracked her through the forest because he could not bear to lose her, who was offering her not just protection, but partnership. She turned back to face him, her decision crystallizing. I will come with you, to the capital. But I have conditions. Aiden's relief was palpable, though he tried to hide it. Name them. Arya lifted her chin, channeling her mother's strength, her father's courage. First, I want access to all records regarding the Whitlock purge. Everything. I need to understand exactly what happened. Who gave the orders? Who carried them out? I need the truth, complete and unvarnished. Aiden nodded. Agreed. Second, I want your promise that you will investigate your mother's role in your father's death. And if she was responsible, I want that truth made public. Consequences be damned. Aiden's expression tightened, but he nodded again. Agreed. Though that investigation may tear apart what is left of the royal family's reputation. And third, Arya continued, her voice gaining strength, I want a formal position. Not as your healer, not as your mate, but as an advisor on matters concerning gifted wolves and how they are treated in this kingdom. I want the authority to advocate for changes in policy and the resources to help any others like me who might still be hiding. If I am going to help you build something better, I need to be able to actually affect change, not just be a symbolic gesture. For a moment, Aiden just stared at her, and Arya worried she had pushed too far, demanded too much. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features from harsh to almost beautiful. You are remarkable. Do you know that? Most people in your position would be negotiating for safety, for wealth, for comfort. You are negotiating for the power to help others. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and held out his hand. I agree to all your conditions. You will be my advisor on gifted affairs, with a seat on my council and full authority to implement policy changes as you see fit. And in return, you give me a chance to prove that I am worth the faith you are placing in me. Arya looked at his outstretched hand, at the choice he was offering. It was not the safe choice, was probably not even the smart choice, but it felt right in a way that nothing else had since her parents died. She placed her hand in his, felt his fingers close around hers with gentle strength, and felt the mate bond flare to life between them. It was like touching lightning, a current of energy that ran from his hand through hers and straight to her soul. She gasped, her knees nearly buckling from the intensity of it, and Aiden caught her, his other arm coming around her waist to steady her. Easy, he murmured, his breath warm against her temple. The initial connection can be overwhelming. Just breathe through it. She did as he said, focusing on the rhythm of her breathing, while the bond settled into something less consuming, a warmth that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. When she finally looked up at him, she found him watching her with an expression that made her chest tight. Hunger, yes, but also tenderness, protectiveness, and something that might have been hope. We should go, she said, her voice not quite steady. Before Lyra decides that your guards not attacking her camp was some kind of trick and launches a preemptive strike. Aiden's smile turned rueful. Good point. Though I suspect she is already planning how to kill me for stealing you away from her revolution. They walked back toward where Aiden had left his guards, still holding hands because neither of them seemed willing to break the contact. As they approached the tree line, Arya could see the royal guard still in formation, watchful but not aggressive. And standing slightly apart from them, his arms crossed and his expression thunderous, was a man she recognized from descriptions she had heard in the marketplace. Magnus Draven, the former beta who wanted Aiden's throne. He was alive, and he was standing with the royal guard as if he had every right to be there. Arya's hand tightened on Aiden's, dread flooding through her. Aiden! But before she could finish the warning, Magnus smiled, cold and triumphant, and the world exploded into chaos. So what do you think happens next? Does Arya survive Magnus's betrayal? Will she and Aiden overcome the darkness of their shared past to build something new together? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me what you think about Arya's choice, about the mate bond, about everything that just happened. And if you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It really helps me bring you more stories like this one. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.